Later today, President Trump is expected to sign a stopgap spending bill to keep the government funded for at least another week as lawmakers work to finish legislation that would extend funding through the rest of the fiscal year. Earlier today, I spoke with Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford, and he weighed in on facing a short-term funding bill yet again.
Yeah, this is a continual problem that we have in the nation. This is not new. It's interesting to me the number of Oklahomans and other people that catch me and say, why can't we get this resolved? I keep telling people in 1974, when the Budget Act was actually passed, it was right after Watergate. It was create more transparency in this open process. The process has only worked 4 times, though, since 1974. So if you feel like every year everyone says the same thing, it's because just about every year since 1974, we've said the same thing. We have got to get a different process for how to do budgeting so we can have some predictability. It's the number one thing that I hear from people. Stop doing the cliffs. Let's get some predictability in the process. You can do that, but we have to change the way we do it to be able to make it a consistent process.
We're almost 100 days into the Trump presidency. Let me just ask you, what's that meant for collegiality and comedy on Capitol Hill? Are you getting along better with your Democratic colleagues? Has that changed at all?
You know, in some ways, I look forward to the 100 days being done because everyone tries to see all these things that have to be done within the first 100 days. We can get that deadline over with and actually get back to it, because there are some of my Democratic colleagues that would say, I don't want anything to get done in the 100 days because the president gets additional credit for it at that point. So there's a stall to be able to get it past the 100 days. That kind of silliness just goes on internally. So let's get past it and let's get on with it. The Senate's main job for every president at the very beginning is not necessarily legislation, it's people. The Senate has to go through 1,200 confirmations every time that there's a new president. And so most of the Senate's work the first 100 days was actually going through all these different White House cabinet officers and secretaries and everything else. The second thing that we've done is we focused on regulations. We've used 13 times something called the Congressional Review Act to be able to evaluate the midnight regulations of the Obama administration and to be able to say, do those line up with the values now? 13 times those have been rejected and turned away. To give you a hint on that, only one time since the 1980s has that happened, and that was the one time right after there was the ergonomics rule put into place. So now we've done it 13 times now. So there's a step back to deregulations, but then it's also the personnel issues of the Senate.
All right, so you're looking at regulation. You've got the White House looking at regulation. How well is the White House interfacing with the Congress right now when it comes to regulatory reform?
Well, it's a good start for them, but I would tell you the biggest issue they've got is still to be able to finish out their personnel. They've got to get to us additional names for the undersecretaries and such, because that's who we'll work with the most on some of these specific items. They've actually put in every time you put one regulation in, you've got to take 2 out, which I've heard some people say that's a crazy idea, that'll never work. And I smile and say, if you track regulatory policy, you'll know that's already the policy in the UK. It's already the policy in Canada. It's already the policy in Australia. It's not a bad policy to put in place. The administration put that into place early in the administration, but we've still got to be able to get past executive orders and the Congressional Review Acts to doing some real regulatory reform, and that's one of the things I'm trying to push. Small business, medium-sized, large business. How do you actually get more input earlier? How do you make sure there's consistency in the guidance? And how do you make sure there's good, sound science as we walk through it?
Last question here. How do you sell what you saw from the White House this week to your constituents back home? The tax reform proposal the White House has put forward here counts on there being a significant amount of economic growth. There is no border-adjusted tax. Is that something that you can get behind? Is that something you think your constituents can get behind?
Well, I think what my constituents get behind is simplification of the tax code and trying to be able to create a straightforward system that businesses can actually increase their business activity. The House has a proposal. It's already been out. The White House has now put out a proposal. In the next month or so, the Senate will put out a proposal. We're going to do this the right way, where all 3 bodies come together, try to negotiate, find the common ground among the 3 and say those are settled issues among the 3. Where do we have differences, and try to be able to work those differences out. But I don't know of anyone that says if we just keep the status quo, the economy actually gets better. We're trickling along at 2% or less of economic growth. We can't continue to sustain that as a nation and get ahead of our debt. So if we're going to get ahead of our debt and deficit, create more jobs, then we've got to get a faster growing economy. You can't do that with the same tax policy we've had.
So quickly here, you will back tax reform if it's not deficit neutral?
Well, we're going to have to look and see exactly what that means. All of them are going to be scored, but yes, I would support one that's not deficit neutral, but we've got to see how far out of line it is, because it's always the sense that you try to stimulate the economy by getting more economic activity. There's a challenge of, do you get more people to pay taxes, or do you get more tax-paying people? If you get more economic activity, you get more tax-paying people.
My interview with Oklahoma Republican Senator James Lankford from a little bit earlier today.